They talked about what Marcus needed. Not in a political way, not transactionally, not as a problem to be managed, in a human way. A man asking another man, "What is your life? What are its lacks? What would make it better?" Marcus talked about the VA. He talked about 3 men he knew from his unit. Good men, men who had served faithfully, who had struggled for years to get mental health care through the system. One of them had succeeded eventually. One of them was still waiting. One of them had not waited long enough. He talked about the shoulder, the way it had shaped everything, the work he could take and couldn't take, the mornings that started with pain before they started with anything else, the orthopedic consultation he had been referred to 2 years ago and still couldn't fully afford. He talked about the dreams. He had never talked about the dreams to anyone, but he talked about them now to this man in this room because it seemed like finally, the right context. Dreams about the Korangal, dreams about the sprint across open ground, dreams about the thing in the locked room, which in the dreams was not locked anymore, and he was standing in the doorway, looking at everything inside it, and it was very loud and very bright. Whitfield listened. He did not speak while Marcus was speaking. He listened in the way that a person listens when they are genuinely receiving, not simply waiting for their turn. When Marcus finished, Whitfield said, "I'm going to call the VA regional director in Philadelphia personally, not to have your file fast-tracked. That's not how it works, and it shouldn't be, but to flag it, to make sure it's not falling through a crack. Is that acceptable?" "It's acceptable," Marcus said. "And the shoulder. My personal physician is one of the best orthopedic surgeons in the country. I want you to see him. I'll arrange it. No cost." Marcus looked at him. "I'm not looking for charity, James." "It's not charity," Whitfield said simply. "It's a debt, a small, partial, inadequate payment on a debt that I should have been paying for 20 years. Let me do this much." A long pause. "All right," Marcus said. Marcus left Washington at 4 in the afternoon. The drive north was through the late afternoon light, which was golden and long in the way of spring evenings, laying itself across the fields and the hills in broad, warm sheets. He drove with the radio off. He needed the quiet. He was trying to figure out what he felt. He had come to Washington looking for something. He had found something. Not exactly the thing he was looking for, but something. He had been seen, actually, genuinely seen, by a man who had been avoiding seeing him, not with malice, but with the habitual unseeing that busy, rising people practice towards the complications of their past. Was that enough? He turned this question over in his mind the way you turn a stone in your hand, feeling its weight, its edges, its temperature. He thought about the young man at the Senate hearing, the one with the artificial leg who had waited 14 months for mental health care and tried to kill himself twice. That young man was not Marcus Cole. He was his own person with his own story, but Marcus felt a kinship with him, felt the particular loneliness of being a person who had given something enormous and then found themselves in a world that had returned to its ordinary size and expected you to fit inside it. He thought about his father's handshake at Fort Campbell, the wet eyes that turned away quickly. He thought about his mother's face in the kitchen the day he enlisted. He thought about Danny Okafa humming in the firefight, the round that punched through his thigh and sent him to Germany. He thought about the men in the locked room, the ones whose faces he saw in dreams, the ones whose names he knew he would carry until the day he died, without anyone ever asking him to, simply because he had been there and they had not, and the fact of that felt like a weight that should be borne by someone. He crossed the Pennsylvania border as the last light was leaving the sky. The stars came out over the hills, not visible in Washington, which drowns everything in its own brightness, but here, on the 2-lane highway north of the city, the sky opened up, and the stars were thick and sharp and looked approximately eternal. Marcus rolled his window down an inch. He breathed the cool air. He thought, "It's not over. This thing between me and Whitfield is not over. You can't close 20 years in an afternoon. But something shifted. Something real happened. And that is not nothing. He pulled into Harlow Creek just after 9 o'clock. He parked in front of his house. He sat in the truck for a moment. He looked at the field, which was dark now, just a pale shape in the starlight. He got out. He went inside. He made a cup of tea. He sat at the kitchen table and thought about everything for a while. Then he picked up his phone and called his mother. "Hello?" she said. She sounded sleepy. It was past 9 and she went to bed early. "Hey, Mom, it's me. Marcus, is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," he said. "I just wanted to hear your voice." A pause. Then, "You ate today?" He smiled. "Yeah, Mom, I ate." "Good," she said. "Good." The orthopedic appointment happened in June. The surgeon, Dr. Robert Finelli, who had a practice in Washington and was indeed as good as Whitfield had claimed, reviewed Marcus's history and ordered imaging and told him that the shoulder had been dealing with a torn labrum that had never been properly repaired, on top of the original dislocation damage. There was a surgery. It went well. Marcus spent 2 weeks in recovery at his house, arm in a sling, learning to manage with his non-dominant hand. George Adkins from next door came over several times and sat on the porch with him and talked about baseball and the quality of his homemade beer and several other matters of reasonable importance. Slow days, patient days. Marcus read. He reread East of Eden. He read a history of the Korean War, and then a history of the Second World War, and then for the first time in his adult life, a biography of Lincoln. He sat with Lincoln's life for a while, the weight of it, the impossible cost of it, the fact that Lincoln had absorbed more grief than any person should have to absorb, and kept working anyway, kept believing anyway, kept choosing anyway. He thought Steinbeck was right. It was possible. The choosing. Hard, but possible. His shoulder, after the surgery, began to recover in a way that 20 years of living with it broken had not allowed him to imagine. The deep ache that lived there in cold weather, it didn't go away entirely, too many years of damage for that, but it diminished. It became something he managed rather than something he endured. He ran again after the recovery period, 3 miles in the early morning, through Harlow Creek, past the gas station and the diner and the church and the hardware store, out onto the country road that ran north through the fields, the light coming up over the hills, the birds. He ran and felt something that was close to lightness. September. Marcus is on the porch, evening, beer in hand, the cold coffee of the opening scene, except it was beer now and it was not cold, when his phone buzzed. Whitfield. Not a staffer, not Caleb Briggs, Whitfield himself. Marcus answered. "Marcus." "James." A pause, the particular weight of a person gathering themselves to say something that matters. "I've been thinking about what you said at lunch. I've been thinking about it since the day you left, if I'm being honest." Marcus waited. "I want to do something, not just for you, for the broader thing, for the people who fell through the cracks the way you described. I've been working with my staff on a bill, a real bill with teeth, that addresses the diagnostic and treatment delays at the VA, particularly for physical injuries incurred during service that were never properly documented or treated, the kind of thing that happens when a soldier treats his shoulder as a cost of doing business and never makes a formal claim because that's what soldiers do. "All right," Marcus said. "I want you to testify, in front of the committee, your story, not your heroism. I mean your heroism too, but specifically the after, the shoulder, the 20 years, what it cost you, what the system failed to do." Silence. "I'm not a good public speaker," Marcus said. "Yes, you are," Whitfield said. "You spoke to me clearly enough. Speak to them the same way." Marcus looked at the field. The last light was going. The fireflies were starting up along the tree line. "Why me specifically?" Marcus said. "There are 1,000 men with better stories than mine."
"There are," Whitfield agreed, "but yours is the one I know, and yours is the one I owe, and I want to be in the room when you tell it. I want to sit on that committee and hear your voice and know that I am finally doing what I should have done a long time ago." Marcus was quiet for a long time. "All right," he said. "Thank you, Marcus." "Don't thank me yet," Marcus said. "You haven't heard what I'm going to say." Whitfield laughed, a real laugh, short and surprised and genuine. "I wouldn't have it any other way," he said. October, the Russell Senate Building, room 325, a formal hearing room of the kind that was built to remind everyone inside it of the gravity of American democracy, the high ceilings, the polished wood, the tiers of seats for the committee members, the single table at the center for the witnesses. Marcus wore the blue button.
And yet, Marcus noticed, in a way he kept private even from himself, that the story of James Whitfield never mentioned the moment when James Whitfield almost died, never mentioned the Korengal ambush, never mentioned the flanker who had almost shot him in the back while he was on his radio, never mentioned the soldier who had sprinted through open fire to stop that from happening. This was, of course, reasonable. Politicians do not typically include near-death stories in their biographies unless the story reflects well on them personally. The Korengal ambush was a story about being saved, not a story about saving. It was not, from Whitfield's perspective, a story about his valor. Marcus understood this, and he was fine with it. He was genuinely fine with it for a long time. But one winter evening, sitting in his house in Harlow Creek, the shoulder aching the way it always did in cold weather, he turned on the television and saw Whitfield giving a speech on the floor of the house, and Whitfield said something. He said, "I've looked danger in the face. I've made hard decisions under fire. I know what sacrifice looks like." And Marcus turned off the television. He sat in the quiet house. He thought, does he remember? Not the facts. The facts lived in official records, but the memory, the thing that happened between two human beings in a valley in Afghanistan, the debt that one man acknowledged to another, did that still exist anywhere inside James Whitfield? Or had it dissolved, the way so many things dissolve, in the long chemical bath of ambition and time? He thought about writing a letter. He never wrote it. He thought about reaching out through official channels, finding a veterans organization, a public event, some way to put himself in Whitfield's path. He never did that either. Because here is what Marcus knew about himself. He was not good at asking for things, especially things that felt like they should be given freely. Asking for something that should have been given freely felt to him like a kind of defeat. So he waited. He did not know what he was waiting for, but he waited. 2019. Whitfield was now a senator. He had moved from the House to the Senate 4 years earlier in a successful campaign that had made national news. He was widely considered a likely presidential candidate at some future point. He was 57 years old. His hair was silver at the temples now. He still had those calculating gray eyes. And there was a Senate hearing, a committee hearing on veterans' health care. Marcus saw it mentioned in the news. He pulled it up on his laptop that evening. The hearing was being streamed on the Senate's website. He sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and watched. The hearing was about the failures of the VA healthcare system. Veterans who had waited months for appointments. Veterans who had fallen through the cracks. Veterans with PTSD who had not received treatment. Veterans who had killed themselves while waiting for care. Witnesses were testifying. Veterans, doctors, advocates. Some of the veterans cried. Some were angry. All of them were telling stories about a system that was supposed to honor their service and had, in many cases, failed them profoundly. Whitfield was on the committee. He asked questions, good questions, sharp questions. He was clearly engaged. He clearly understood the material. And then he gave a statement. He spoke about the sacred obligation the country had to its veterans. He spoke about the men and women who had served, who had sacrificed, who had come home carrying wounds that were not always visible. He spoke beautifully and passionately, and he clearly meant every word.
Marcus watched. He watched the camera cut to Whitfield's face as a veteran, a young man, maybe 25, with an artificial leg, described waiting 14 months from mental health care, and how during that time he had attempted suicide twice. Whitfield's expression was grave and sincere. Marcus watched. And then, without entirely planning to, he picked up his phone and went to Whitfield's Senate website. There was a contact form. He filled it out. Name: Marcus Cole, former specialist, 101st Airborne Division, 502nd Infantry Regiment, Company C. Service dates: 2002 to 2006. Message: Senator Whitfield, we served together in Afghanistan in 2003-2004. I was in your company. I would like to speak with you if that is possible. I hope you are well. He hit submit before he could talk himself out of it. Then he closed his laptop and sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time. His shoulder ached. He took 2 aspirin and went to bed. A response came 4 days later. It was from a staff member named Kayla Briggs, Deputy Chief of Staff. The message was polite, professional, and completely without warmth. It thanked Marcus for his service. It noted that Senator Whitfield appreciated hearing from veterans. It said that due to the volume of correspondence the senator received, personal meetings were not possible, but that if Marcus had a specific policy concern he wanted to raise, he could submit it through the appropriate committee contact form. Marcus read this message twice. He put his phone in his pocket. He went outside and stood on the porch and looked at the field for a while. Then he went inside and made dinner. Pasta, nothing special. He ate it at the kitchen table and listened to the radio. He thought, well, there it is. He did not feel the full weight of it yet. That would come later, slowly, in accumulated increments, the way certain kinds of pain work. Not a single blow, but a slow pressure, building over time. He went back to work the next morning. He serviced a machining lathe that had been running rough for 2 weeks. He found the problem, worn drive belt, easy fix, and corrected it, and felt the clean satisfaction of a mechanical problem solved. He thought about Whitfield on the drive home. He thought, maybe he never received the message. These things go through layers of staff. Maybe it was routed as a standard veterans outreach contact and Whitfield never saw it personally. He thought, maybe he saw it and didn't know who I was. It's been 15 years. The name Marcus Cole is not remarkable. He thought, maybe he knows exactly who I am and chose not to respond personally. He did not know which of these was true. He did not know which would hurt more. Let us step back for a moment. Let us look at the whole picture of Marcus's life in the years between the war and this evening on the porch. Because there is a danger in telling a story like this and making the ordinary life seem like merely a waiting period, as if everything between the war and the confrontation is just a gap, an intermission. But the ordinary life was not an intermission. It was his life. He worked at the machine shop for 12 years. He became the senior machinist. He was good at the work, very good. He could look at a piece of metal and know with an accuracy that bordered on intuition what it needed. He trained younger men. He built a reputation as someone dependable and precise. He was the person the shop foreman called when there was a difficult job that needed doing right. He bought his house outright in 2018 after the rental market pushed his rent beyond what seemed reasonable. A small house, 2 bedrooms, on the east side of Harlow Creek. He fixed it up slowly over the years. New roof, new windows. The porch he rebuilt himself over the course of a summer, plank by plank, with wood he selected himself from a lumber yard. He had friends, not many. He didn't need many. His neighbor, George Atkins, a retired plumber who liked baseball and made his own beer, came over some Saturday evenings, and they watched games and talked about nothing in particular. A woman from the machine shop, Linda Pace, who ran the front office and had known Marcus since his first day there, had lunch with him occasionally. She was married with children, and they were simply friends, a friendship built entirely in the quiet space of shared daily proximity, which is one of the most durable. His mother was still alive.
She had moved in with Clara in Philadelphia in 2015 when the stairs in the family home became too much. Marcus drove to Philadelphia twice a year and called her every Sunday. She still asked every single time if he was eating properly. He was. He was eating properly. He ran 3 miles every morning, rain or shine, winter or summer. He cooked his own meals. He kept his house neat. He did not drink more than 2 beers in an evening. He went to bed at 10 and woke at 6. He had built a life, a solid, decent, unremarkable life. And if there was a room inside him that stayed locked, and if the ache in his shoulder in cold weather was more than just physical, and if sometimes at 3 in the morning he woke from a dream he could not remember and lay staring at the ceiling with his heart racing, well, many men had such rooms. Many men bore such aches. He was not special in this. He was just Marcus Cole, 51 years old, Harlow Creek, Pennsylvania. A man who had been somewhere and come back and built something modest and honest from the materials available. That was enough. Most days, that was enough. In the spring of 2022, a fundraising event for Senator Whitfield was held in Danbury, the town where Marcus worked. It was at the Danbury Grand Hotel, the nicest hotel in the county, which was not very nice by national standards, but very nice by local ones. The event was a dinner, 150 guests, $500 a plate, to support Whitfield's re-election campaign. Marcus found out about it from Linda Pace, who had clipped a notice from the local paper and left it on his workbench without comment. Linda was a perceptive woman. She knew more about Marcus than she ever.
Close your eyes for just a moment. Picture a man sitting alone on a porch in a small town somewhere in rural Pennsylvania. It is early morning. The sun has not yet fully risen. There is a cup of coffee on the wooden railing beside him, but he has not touched it. It has gone cold. He is in his mid-50s. His face is weathered in the way that only certain kinds of pain can weather a face. Not age, not sickness, something deeper, something that lives behind the eyes. His name is Marcus Cole. He is watching the television through the open screen door. On the screen, a man in an expensive suit stands at a podium. Cameras flash all around him. He is smiling. He looks important. He looks powerful. He looks like a man who has never known a single day of real suffering in his entire life. But Marcus knows different. Marcus knows that man. He knows him in a way that very few people on earth could ever understand. He saved that man's life, and that man has no idea who he is anymore. Marcus reaches down and picks up the cold coffee. He takes a slow sip. He does not look away from the screen. His jaw is tight. His eyes are distant. Somewhere between the past and the present, he is caught like a bird inside a room with no windows. He exhales slowly, and then he says, very quietly, to no one at all, "I remember you." To understand this story, you have to go back. Not just back to the war, further than that. You have to go back to a small town called Harlow Creek, Pennsylvania. Population 1,100 people, give or take a few dozen depending on the season. One gas station, one diner, one church that the whole town used no matter what denomination they claimed to be. A hardware store that smelled like wood shavings and old motor oil. A high school with a football field that flooded every spring. Marcus Cole grew up there. He was the second of 3 children. His father, Earl Cole, worked at the steel mill 30 miles north. His mother, Donna, worked part-time at the diner and raised the kids the rest of the time. They were not poor. They were not rich. They were the kind of family that existed in the exact middle of America, the kind that nobody writes songs about, but that holds the whole country together without anyone noticing. Marcus was a quiet boy, not shy, just thoughtful. He was the kind of kid who watched things carefully before he spoke about them, who sat at the back of the classroom not because he didn't care, but because he could see everything from there. He played football in the fall. He helped his father fix the truck on Saturdays.
He read novels he borrowed from the school library, Louis L'Amour, Hemingway, a battered copy of The Catcher in the Rye that had someone else's name written in the front cover. He didn't always understand everything he read, but he loved the feeling of being taken somewhere else, of being inside another life for a while. He was 17 when the towers fell. He remembers exactly where he was, sitting in Mrs. Pierce's history class. Someone knocked on the classroom door and whispered to the teacher, and then Mrs. Pierce turned on the small television mounted in the corner of the room, and everyone watched, and nobody said a single word for a very long time. Marcus watched the smoke rising from the buildings on that tiny screen and felt something shift inside him. Not anger exactly, something heavier than anger, something that felt like the ground moving underneath you when you didn't expect it. He enlisted 2 weeks after his 18th birthday. His mother cried. His father shook his hand very firmly and didn't let go for a long moment. His younger sister, Clara, who was 15 at the time, sat at the kitchen table and stared at her hands and didn't say anything at all. Marcus told them he would be fine. He believed it when he said it. Fort Benning, Georgia, July. The heat there is not like normal heat. It is a physical presence, a weight. It sits on your shoulders and pushes down. By 6 in the morning, you are already soaked through. By noon, you feel like you were being cooked alive inside your uniform. Marcus had never been to the South before. He had never been far from Harlow Creek at all, really. And suddenly he was surrounded by hundreds of young men from places he had only heard of: New York, Texas, California, Georgia itself. Boys from farms and cities and suburbs. Boys whose reasons for being there were as varied as their accents. Some of them were there because of the towers. Some were there because of family tradition. Some were there because they had nothing else. Some were there because they needed the money for college. A few were there because they made a mistake and a judge had offered them a choice. Marcus was there because he believed in something. He couldn't always put it into words, but it was there, solid as stone in the center of his chest. Drill Sergeant Holloway was not a man who believed in gentleness. He was a compact, powerful man from Alabama with a voice like a truck engine and a stare that could make you feel like you had done something wrong even when you were standing completely still. He had served 2 tours in the Gulf War. He had the kind of posture that made you understand, without him ever saying it, that he had seen things you had not yet imagined. He rode Marcus hard in those first weeks, not because Marcus was weak, because Marcus was good, and Holloway had learned long ago that you had to push the good ones hardest. The weak ones would either find something inside them or they would wash out. But the good ones, the ones who had real potential, those were the ones who needed pressure, needed to be shaped while they were still being formed. Marcus ran faster than anyone in his platoon. He could do more push-ups. He could read a map like he had been born with a compass in his hand. He was calm under pressure in a way that surprised even himself. But more than anything else, he had a quality that you could not train into a person. You either had it or you didn't. He was the kind of man who looked around before he looked ahead. What that means is this: when most people are focused on what is directly in front of them, Marcus was always scanning the edges, looking for the thing that no one else had noticed yet. It was a habit he had developed as a boy, watching things carefully before he spoke about them. And in the United States Army, it turned out to be one of the most valuable qualities a soldier could possess. He graduated in the top 5% of his training class. He was assigned to the 101st Airborne Division. He was 20 years old. Bagram Airfield, March 2003. The plane touched down before dawn. Marcus pressed his face against the small oval window and saw nothing but darkness and the white glow of airstrip lights. Then, as they taxied slowly to a stop, the mountains appeared, massive, pale shapes against a sky that was just beginning to lighten at the edges. He had never seen mountains like that before. The mountains of Afghanistan are not like mountains anywhere else. They are enormous and ancient and completely indifferent. They do not care that you are there. They do not care about your war. They have watched 1,000 wars come and go, and they will watch 1,000 more, and they will still be standing when every single person involved is long dead and forgotten. Marcus stepped off the plane, and the cold hit him immediately. He had expected heat. The Middle East meant heat. That was what he had pictured. But March in Afghanistan, at altitude, is brutally cold. The wind cuts through your uniform like it has a personal grudge. He pulled his jacket tighter and looked up at those mountains and felt something he had not felt since the day he enlisted. He felt small. Not in a bad way, not exactly, but in a way that forced a kind of honesty, the kind of honesty that comes when you are in the presence of something much larger than yourself, and all your stories about who you are and what you are capable of seem suddenly thin and unconvincing. The other men around him were doing the same thing, looking up at the mountains, adjusting to this new world that was nothing like the world they had left behind. Some were joking, some were quiet, a few were praying. His platoon sergeant was a stocky man named Sergeant First Class David Reyes. Reyes was from San Antonio, Texas. He was 34 years old, which felt ancient to Marcus at the time. He had already done one tour in Afghanistan and one in Iraq. He had the unhurried manner of a man who had learned through experience that panic burned energy and solved nothing. Reyes looked at Marcus and the others and said very calmly, "Welcome to the graveyard of empires, gentlemen. Try not to add your names to the list." It was not funny, but nobody laughed because of the joke. They laughed because of the fear, and laughing was better than the alternative. That first morning, as the sun came up over the mountains and the base began to come alive around them, Marcus found a quiet corner and took out the small notebook he always carried. He wrote one line, "I am here. Everything starts now." He did not know then how true that was. Captain James Whitefield arrived at Bagram 2 weeks after Marcus. He was not what Marcus expected an officer to look like. He was tall and lean, with close-cropped blonde hair and light gray eyes that always seemed to be calculating something. He was 31 years old. He had a West Point degree and a manner that was precise and controlled in everything he did. He spoke in complete, well-organized